Hi, friends. I'm Suzanne Clemens, one of the pastors at Trinity United Methodist Church in Lafayette, Indiana. And I'm just so happy to be with you here at the beginning of the third week of Advent. And here at Trinity, we've been preparing for Christmas by reflecting on the names that we have for Jesus and how these names reveal who God is to us, right? How they help us to make sense of the wonder and the mystery of the incarnation, right? The coming of God to us in the human form of Jesus as an infant born here into the world. And this week of Advent, we are reflecting on the name Emmanuel, which means literally, God is with us. And Jesus is called Emmanuel. And that name, we hear that in Scripture. And so today we're going to reflect on what that name means to us and what it tells us about God and about ourselves. And I want to start today by sharing a couple of stories with you all, a couple of profiles of people who have touched my heart recently that I want to share with you. And the first one is the story of a woman who I've just met over the past year, and she's quickly become a friend of mine, someone who occupies a special place in my life. The past few years have been especially difficult for her and her family. They lost her younger brother at a fairly young age to tragic circumstances these past couple of years. And as I've gotten to know her, she's also shared with me that she lost her parents at young ages too. She's someone who knows the journey of loss and grief, and she has a keen awareness of how fragile life can be. Her career has been in special education, so she's dedicated her professional life to students with special needs and also to the teachers who serve them. And this is hard work, and it's been particularly hard since the beginning of the pandemic. And when I look at this friend, I see a woman who has felt the sharp edges of loss multiple times, and someone who looks out onto the world in search of how she can meet human need. And she and I, we called up recently and we talked about our families and about Christmas, how we're both making meaning of the holidays. And she talked about her work, in special ed. And she said to me with this yearning in her voice, she said, I just want what I do to make a real difference for others. So this friend is someone who cares deeply. She's someone who I look at and I think her heart is open. And she's just got so much room for others and a desire to keep growing a space to care and to serve even more deeply. My second snapshot for you all is a couple. And some of you who are listening may have attended our last Fusion program in November when we welcomed a couple, Michael and Michelle, who are parents at the Children's Home in Lebanon, which is about 45 minutes south of us here in Lafayette. Michael and Michelle live in a group home there for children who, for whatever reason, don't have a home where they can receive the nurture and safety that they need. So Michael and Michelle are group home parents for about 8 children. If I remember correctly, these are boys up to 18 years of age. And before coming here to Indiana to work in this group home, they worked in homes in other states. And Michael shared with us that they both know that this is their life's work. And over the years, they count about 70 children as their own, right? Children who have been in their group home at some point in their lives. Now, all of the children in the homes with them, once they reach the age of 18, transition out of the home and begin a new chapter of adult life. And sometimes there are also situations when a child in their care makes a poor choice and has to leave the home. But regardless, Michael said that the two of them leave their own door, right, the door of their hearts open for all of these children to remain part of their lives. They continue to be available to any of these children if they have the desire to remain part of their life. They share meals with these young people, they counsel and support them. And Michael shared that right now about 20 of the kids that they've parented in the past are currently active in their lives. And when I caught up with Michael and Michelle, again, just within the past week, they were that day on their way to look at a piece of property that they're hoping to buy, where they hope to build another home where the kids can live once they leave the group home. Because they see how hard it is for these their adopted children is what they consider all of them. How hard it is for them to make their way once they leave the group home. They see their struggle, and so Michael and Michelle are continuing to be there for them, to listen and respond and love them in all the ways that they can to meet their needs. And Michael said to me, he wanted to be clear. His words were, this is God's work through us. And if any of you had a chance to meet Michael and Michelle back in November and hear them share their story, my guess is that you wouldn't be surprised by any of this I'm updating you with today. They're just genuine salt of the earth people, folks that when I meet them, I sense, what open hearts they have, how deeply they're able to care, how free they are, not focusing on their own need, but looking out for others, and what amazing room in their hearts they have for all of these children. So here we are in Advent, these 4 weeks before Christmas, when we look forward to God's coming to be with us in Jesus, and when we're called to prepare to make room in our hearts for God. But for me, probably the most wondrous part of the Christmas story is what God shows us about the depth of God's love for God's children, that's all of us, in choosing to come to us in the first place. I mean, why would God choose to do this? To give up so many aspects of who God is, right? God's sovereignty, God's sheer power and control, and come to be with us as a vulnerable baby who then grows up to experience as a young man all the joys and pains of human existence. Right? So what is it that's revealed to us about God in the Christmas story? What does God coming to be with us, what does God as Emmanuel tell us about God? And also, what does it tell us about ourselves? Well, Ruth Barrows writes this about God's coming to be with us, about what God as Emmanuel means. So I am going to quote Ruth Burroughs here at length because I just think this is such a beautiful passage. And I want you to hear how it echoes the stories that I've already shared with you. So here's Ruth Burroughs. Consider a blissfully happy couple finding all they need in one another. For no other reason than generosity and the desire to share their happiness, they decide to adopt children as their own. From then on, their life undergoes a profound change. Now they're vulnerable. Their happiness is wrapped up in the welfare of the children, and things can never be the same again. If the children choose to alienate themselves and start on the path to ruin, the couple are stricken. They'll plead, humble themselves, make huge sacrifices, go out of themselves to get their loved ones to understand that the home is still their home, that the love they have been given is unchanging. This perhaps gives us some insight into redemption. In a mystery we cannot fathom, God empties himself, loses himself, in bringing back to himself his estranged, lost children. And this bringing back of the children is all the Father wants. God is no longer pure God, but always God with humanity in his heart. In the incarnation, God shows us that there is hardly any limit to which he won't go to demonstrate his love for us. We're so precious to God that he's willing to give up everything to bring us back to himself, to show us his unwavering and unchanging love for us. And God isn't waiting for us to get ourselves together first, is he? No. God comes to us in the midst of our stubbornness and our faults and our blindness. I mean, think back to what the state of the world was like when Jesus was born, right? It was a mess. And look at the specific conditions even on the night Jesus was born. The journey that Mary and Joseph had taken, the no room in the inn, the being born in a humble, rough manger, not ideal. But God made us, and God knows our shortcomings, and he knows that, to say the least, things with us will be less than perfect. And he knows us, he doesn't expect us to be any different, and he loves us unconditionally anyway. And all he wants is for us to open our hearts and turn to him and accept his love so that he can shape our hearts to be more like his. And by coming to be with us in vulnerable human form, God also redeems our ordinary and often difficult lives. So if we've ever felt or perceived that there's a gap or a distance between us and God, the incarnation just blows this out of the water. God, through the incarnation, is with us in our daily grind, whatever that is for each one of us. God is with us, and God is for us. God shows us through the incarnation that he's got skin in this game of life with us. And there's nothing that we'll experience in this life, right? Joy or apprehension, sorrow or pain, all of the range of emotions and experiences, God has also, through Jesus, walked and experienced. Because in a mystery that we can't fully understand, Jesus was both fully divine and fully human. And I don't know about you, but internalizing this truth about Jesus gives me profound comfort and peace and hope. God did not come to remove or to erase or to minimize the particulars of human life. Instead, God came to walk with us in our human lives and to show us how to love him and each other through, not against, our tender and our fragile humanity. Instead of running away from our fear and our weakness and our messes, or even reprimanding us for being human, God comes to us and loves us and says, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you." God comes to us with skin in the game to show us how our lives can be beautiful, not despite our imperfections, but more often through the hard and yet beautiful things that our lives have shown us. And I close this message today with a reflection by C.S. Lewis on the incarnation. And I've shared this before in a message a while back, but it's a beautiful passage. It's one that previous pastors have used often in sermons that I've heard in the past. And so this is C.S. Lewis writing about the incarnation. Again, I'm going to quote Lewis extensively here. Lewis writes that, "Just perhaps we've never wanted and never asked to be made into the sort of creatures that God's going to make us into. But the question is not what we intended ourselves to be, but what God intended us to be when he made us. We may be content to remain what we call ordinary people, but he is determined to carry out quite a different plan. And the job won't be completed in this life, but he means to get us as far as possible before death. And that's why We must not be surprised if we're in for a rough time. Because when a person turns to Christ and seems to be getting on pretty well, right, in the sense that some of his bad habits are now corrected, he often feels that it would now be natural if things would go pretty smoothly. When troubles come along, illnesses, money troubles, new kinds of temptation, he's disappointed. These things he feels might have been necessary early on to make him repent of, the bad old days. But why now? Because God is forcing him on or up to a higher level, putting him into situations where he'll have to be very much braver or more patient or more loving than he ever dreamed of being before. It seems to us all unnecessary, but that's because we've not yet had the slightest notion of the tremendous thing he means to make of us. Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps you can understand what he's doing. He's getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. And you knew that those jobs needed doing, and so you're not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were going to be made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself. My friends, God has skin in the game with us, and he loves us just as we are, but he also loves us way too much to leave us just to ourselves in this life. He's coming to be with us, to make a home in us, so that we may become, as C.S. Lewis said, more brave, more patient, and more loving than we ever imagined we could be. God is doing this for us and for the world he created and loves, a world he also intends to love through us. So don't be surprised when God comes knocking at the door of your heart. Be encouraged, remain hopeful, and be ready to make room. Blessings on all of you as we begin this third week of Advent.